Many of us probably know that the musical Fiddler on the Roof is based on a bunch of serialized stories by Shalom Aleichem called Tevye the Dairyman. And the end of the musical ends with a pogrom where they have to then flee Anatevka. And that actually wasn't in the original. A little bit later on, actually, at the turn of the century 1900, Shalom Aleichem wrote this, epigraph that had the pogrom. And he called it Lech Lecha, you should go forth. And like in the musical, Tevye has a pogrom, and he's friendly enough with the Cossacks in the village that they first have a tea, kind of similar we've seen in the musical, where they warn him that the pogrom is coming, for the wedding scene, and they actually let him break his own windows on his way out. But he still has to leave. And, if you know from the musical, or I really do encourage you to read, I guess you can't say the original unless you speak Yiddish, but to read the literature stories that come from it, because the comparing and contrasting is an interesting sort of piece. But similar to both is that his daughter Chava married a non-Jew, often called Freidka, but also there's actually versions with a different name. And as kind of was typical of the time, they sat Shiva for Chava and said that they were going to cut all contact off. And in both the musical and in the story, as they are leaving Anatevka, Tevye sees Chava again. Here's where things differ, and I'll focus more on the story, where he is consumed by love, but also rage at what she did. Chava is his child. He loves her with all of his heart. And so that certainly comes out in the pages. But he also feels abandoned by her. Because of just the way the tradition was, he had to cut off contact with her. And so she missed all of the being in his life. And so that's where the sense of rage. And then the story ends with an opening to us, the reader, literally, with him saying he's not sure whether he forgives her. Instead, Tevye, who does talk to the reader, says, "What would you do in my place?" And we are left in 1900 with intermarriage, a reality. The pull of tradition, a reality. Remember when I began with Moses Mendelssohn and his family, where he was dealing and embracing modernity and basically saying it's coming whether we like it or not. And he tried to find the way to have his cake and eat it too. I want tradition. I want this Torah. But I have to read it differently with modernity. And here is a way. And then unfortunately, by the time you get to his grandkids, they're not even Jewish anymore. And so I framed this, obviously everything had to be short, and I couldn't get into everything, but with sort of this idea of we have modernity, which comes with this really extreme autonomy. People choose what they want to do, and collectively and individually, hopefully, we have this pull of tradition, of this covenant that we want to be unbreaking from generation to generation, past to present, and God willing, into future. And so we've arrived at one of these ultimate questions, no longer about pork or Shabbat, but our life choice in terms of who we partner and really the home that our young people, the next generation, build. And the reality in 1900, and even more so now in 2024, that Jews are marrying non-Jews, intermarriage. Numbers are all over the place, really, but numbers are as high as 70% of all Jews who identify as non-Orthodox marry a non-Jewish partner. The simplistic thinking is that this is the end of Judaism and that the future is only weak. But the question is, does it have to be? And a little disclaimer, these are my views, kind of in a very short period of time. But if 70% of non-Orthodox Jews marry a non-Jew, then it's in our lives. I know it for fact, and it's there. And so we can't ignore it. And what I say today is not the end of the discussion, it's really the beginning of a discussion. And so I just want to kind of have it that when someone says, oh, Rabbi Schweber said this has to be this. This is the beginning of a discussion. What might be the key to perpetuating Judaism into the future? It's not focused on who the partners are, but by saying the home needs to be a Jewish home. If there is Judaism in that home, with Shabbat candles, with holiday celebrations, showing the joy of what it means to be Jewish, what it means to think and ask Jewish questions, then the likelihood of the children of that home being Jewish is much higher. And yes, research proves when the two partners in the home are Jewish, it makes it easier. But it is possible. It is possible to have a mixed household and for Judaism to be in that home. I have seen it in my career. I have seen it go on even to the next generation, where you had a mixed couple, they had children, it was Jewish. By the way, often that non-Jewish partner was part of it, driving their kids to religious school, coming to the bar and bat mitzvah practices, and all of those things, obviously participating in the holidays. And then the children, when they get to be adults, being a rabbi for 20 years now, I get to see that. They have Jewish homes to themselves. And so it is possible. How does it get done? Through teaching and modeling that living and creating a Jewish home is joyful and meaningful. Remembering that grandparents, the Jewish grandparents, have a huge role in this. They can either bring Judaism to their kids' home and their grandkids' home. Some parents are okay with that. But even if that's not the case, they can bring it to their own home. And so they can invite their grandkids to make latkes on Hanukkah, make sure they come and sleep over and you light candles, and show them how beautiful Judaism is. And so then they will ask the questions. Then we have the hot button questions, which I can just touch upon. One is, can we actively discourage intermarriage? The conservative movement certainly tried, but we also want our children to be part of society. And when they do, it just raises the chances of the likelihood of them connecting and finding a life partner who is not Jewish. What we can do, though, before they leave the home, is to teach our children, again, to see the joy and meaning and holiness in having a Jewish home. And teach them that, yes, we think the ideal is two Jewish partners. And so, yes, when you go out into the world to find partners, think about the home that you're going to build. And then the harder one. Should rabbis be present and conduct the intermarriage ceremony itself? This is where it gets a little dicey, at least with regard to my colleagues. My answer is no. There are paths to the tradition pillars of Judaism, which I have talked about, that I believe, if altered, if changed, really kind of doesn't become traditional Judaism anymore. We are thinking about kadosh, holiness. Shabbat is the holy day of the week. If you go through American history, there were actually attempts to say, oh, we live in modernity, and the world that we work in is off on Sunday. This was back when Saturday was our big work day. And actually, for at least the Ashkenazi ancestors that were here in the turn of that 1900s, which Shalom Aleicham's time, they had to choose, and I mentioned that, whether they worked on Saturday or not, because you limited your working advancement. And so there were actually Reform synagogues that said, you know what, let's turn Sunday into Shabbat. Let's do that. And people are like, what? Shabbat is the holy day. To totally change it is basically, without the name, it's Christianizing Judaism. It's giving in and saying that we're going to follow the Christian week and not the Jewish week. Well, if we're going to say Shabbat Kodesh, well, what is marriage ceremony? It's kiddushin, sanctification. And it is about building a Jewish home. And so kiddushin is within the Jewish realm. We allow for conversion, so it's not a totally closed system. It's not trying to be sort of purebred racial purity. But as a rabbi, I have this power vested in me as sacredness. And I need to think about where my sacredness is being used. So I won't perform the ceremony. But it doesn't mean, again, the same way I've said, if someone tells me I eat pork, I don't judge them and I don't reject them. Even last week, I said, if someone says to me they're non-Zionist, I won't want them to teach here, but I'm going to invite them to my Shabbat table, and I'm going to talk to them and interact with them and try to show and model my Judaism. Well, the same thing with those who choose a non-Jewish partner. There's plenty of ways to get married out here. People don't necessarily want their rabbi anymore. That's a whole other issue. But a wedding, a Jewish home, a couplehood, their relationship with Judaism is not just the wedding day. I know the wedding day is important. And that's what compels some of my colleagues to think otherwise. And we could talk about that another time. But focusing on myself, I would say I am there for this couple before. I've even met with a couple. Some mom said, it's their wedding day. Can you meet with the couple? And then we're going to go off and get married, I don't know, in the city hall or this and that. So I would meet with the couple before, on the wedding day itself, and the day after. I will not be up there as the one to sanctify that wedding. Let them get married by the state. Back to Tevye, though. We're still writing the story. We're not milkmen anymore. I cannot predict the future. All I can do is to present to you the way that I want people to live and learn Jewishly as we strive to perpetuate Judaism into the future. And yes, make the changes where we need to, but we need to hold on to our tradition as well. Otherwise, what are we passing on? Tevye's name means God is good, Tuvia. Tevye always loved to quote the good book. So, in his name, Tuvia, the good book says, Matovu ohalecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. How good are the homes of Jacob, the dwelling places of Israel. If we are able to build Jewish homes and to live our lives with Jewish nishamot, with souls, and teach our children and our grandchildren that love, then I have hope for the future. Shabbat Shalom.